And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. It doesn't, we don't need anything they have.
For Canada, in 2023, the U.S. produced about 400,000 tons of potash, but they consumed 5.3 million tons of it. So what does its capacity to produce potash domestically look like? And I ask that because President Trump has talked about, I want automakers in the U.S., I want things made in the U.S. so that we're not importing from places like Canada, but can they?
Would still obviously have to have Canadian potash. And so that import tariff would just be something that would have to be absorbed.
It started with something most Americans barely knew existed: a quiet mineral buried deep beneath Canadian soil. But by August 2025, that hidden resource had exploded into the center of a global storm. Potash, the fertilizer ingredient often called pink gold, isn't just another commodity. It anchors nearly half of the world's food production, making it as critical to stability as oil or gas. For decades, U.S. farms relied almost entirely on Canada to keep crops growing. But on August 1st, Washington slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian potash, transforming fertilizer into the newest weapon in a trade war. Within days, markets trembled. Prices surged past $350 a ton, 21% higher than the year before, crushing margins for corn growers in Iowa and wheat farmers in Kansas. The question rang across America's heartland. Was this about protecting U.S. industry or the start of a food security crisis no one was ready for? Before we dive deeper, hit that like button. It tells YouTube this story matters. The fallout was immediate. What began as a single tariff line turned into a direct hit on America's farmers. The U.S. consumes more than 5 million tons of potash every year but produces barely 400,000. Canada has always filled the gap, supplying nearly 90% of imports. With tariffs in place, the numbers spoke louder than politics. Prices jumped from $330 to nearly $350 a ton in just 2 months. On paper, that sounds like a market adjustment. On the ground, it was an existential blow. Fertilizer costs ballooned, making it nearly impossible for farmers to break even, let alone plan their next harvest. Even Nutrien, the Canadian giant at the heart of the supply chain, warned openly U.S. farmers would bear the weight of Washington's policies. By the end of 2025, fertilizer and lime accounted for nearly 7% of total production costs, a difference farmers said could decide whether they survived or went under. The pain stretched far beyond balance sheets. Lower yields loomed over wheat and corn producers in Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas. And when grain stumbles, the entire food chain shakes: meat, dairy, fruits, vegetables, all creeping upward in price. Consumers began feeling the sting of a crisis that started with a single trade move. But while America's farm belt boiled over in frustration, Canada played a quieter, longer game. Ottawa didn't retaliate with its own tariffs. Instead, it weaponized potash itself. Saskatchewan, the world's potash capital, became the center of a bold new strategy. The Canadian government invested $400 million into storage and stockpiles, building reserves big enough to cover 2 full planting seasons. By year's end, more than 1,500 new jobs had been created across the province, turning potash into both a shield and a growth engine. And Canada wasn't just insulating itself, it was opening doors abroad. Deals with India and China secured long-term supply agreements in 2 of the world's hungriest fertilizer markets. In Europe, governments from Germany to Poland scrambled to negotiate with Ottawa, treating fertilizer not as trade but as national security. Even Japan entered talks, desperate for guarantees to protect its fragile agricultural base. What began as a tariff fight between neighbors was quickly reshaping the global food map, with Canada emerging as the unexpected power broker. Even closer to home, Mexico began signaling a quiet shift, opening the door to Canadian supply and reducing its reliance on U.S. trade routes. For Mexico, this wasn't just economics. It was insulation, protection from Washington's unpredictable policies, and a step toward agricultural independence. By the end of 2025, the shift was undeniable. The G20 formally classified fertilizer as a strategic resource, placing it alongside oil and natural gas. That recognition carried weight. It changed how governments, corporations, and investors calculated risk. And at the very center stood Canada, holding nearly 40% of global potash production and wielding leverage that stretched far beyond its borders. Suddenly, the question was inescapable. Was the world witnessing the rise of a new kind of resource superpower forged not in oil or rare metals, but in the minerals that feed humanity itself? While American farmers sank under tariffs, Canada experienced the opposite reality: a tidal wave of global capital. Investors who once poured billions into oil fields, tech startups, or speculative real estate began chasing potash instead, treating it as the ultimate food security asset. The transformation was staggering. Shares of Canadian giants like Nutrien didn't just rise in some cases, they doubled within months. Toronto, long a hub for energy and finance, evolved almost overnight into the global nerve center of mineral trading. Where once oil futures dominated the floor, now fertilizer contracts dictated strategy. Hedge funds and sovereign wealth funds saw potash not as a commodity but as insurance against chaos. New projects broke ground across Saskatchewan. Massive storage hubs. Advanced processing plants. Entire towns revived by hiring booms and construction fueled by billions in foreign investment. Commentators began calling Canada the OPEC of fertilizer. And for many Canadians, this wasn't just an economic shift. It was a chance to anchor their national future around a resource every country on Earth needs every single year. Meanwhile, the United States discovered the hidden cost of its tariff gamble. By late 2025, duties of 2,535% had added up to $100 per ton to American potash. For farmers, it meant thinner margins. For consumers, it meant pricier groceries. Meat, dairy, produce all creeping higher. Families who were promised protection instead felt squeezed by what looked like an invisible tax. On Capitol Hill, the debate turned bitter. Lawmakers fought over whether to roll tariffs back or double down in the name of self-sufficiency. But the shine of Make America Self-Reliant was fading fast. Instead of strength, it revealed fragility, a reminder that building walls around resources you don't control can turn quickly into a cage. The potash dispute exposed more than a trade spat. It revealed a new world order, where food itself is a weapon. With nearly 40% of global supply, Canada now holds a lever few nations can ignore. And with Washington dependent on Ottawa for almost 90% of imports, the US suddenly finds itself in the uneasy role of hostage to the partner it once took for granted. What's emerging is not just a price fight, but the quiet unraveling of one of North America's closest alliances. An economic divorce, silent but undeniable, is underway. And over every cabinet meeting, every boardroom strategy session, one question lingers: who will control the safety valve of global food security in the decade ahead? If the story of potash teaches us anything, it's this: the smallest grains can carry the heaviest weight in geopolitics. Today, it's fertilizer. Tomorrow, it could be lithium, rare earths, or even water. Thanks for watching. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click fuels the truth.